In a fiery speech at Davos, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky blasted the EU's lack of political will in countering Russian leader Vladimir Putin. And that was reportedly just minutes after Zelensky had met with U.S. President Donald Trump, a conversation which he said brought agreement about what post-war U.S. security guarantees for Ukraine would look like. However, Zelensky did not offer details. And all this comes ahead of Russian, Ukrainian, and U.S. negotiators holding talks in the United Arab Emirates today. Gulliver Cragg reports.
He was saying again what Ukraine's been saying for a long time about Europe needing to take its security seriously and stop depending on the United States. But he certainly said it in a very harsh, almost angry tone. And I wonder if that wasn't calculated to please the Americans. J.D. Vance, in particular, the vice president, who is extremely critical of Europe. And Ukrainians are a bit worried about what might happen if Donald Trump doesn't make it to the end of his term and J.D. Vance, as vice president, takes over. So perhaps there was a calculation that he could go quite far in criticizing the Europeans because he needs to keep the Americans on side and believes that he can keep the Americans on side. The Ukrainians clearly think that they have to have the Americans providing a backstop if there are ever going to be any security guarantees for Ukraine. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, thinks the same. So hopefully the Europeans won't be too offended, although he was very, very critical of them, and they are his allies. And it might not just be sort of political calculation and maneuvering, because I've noticed over the last week or so that Ukrainian officials and commentators, when talking about, for example, the question of Greenland, they don't seem to be just denouncing Trump as a megalomaniac madman. They talk about genuine security issues in the Arctic that the Europeans really have been ignoring. They seem to be a little bit more on the same page as the Americans than the Europeans are. And Pavlo Klimkin, former Ukrainian foreign minister, now respected pundit, told me the day before yesterday that he sees a shift in the US administration as well, a pivot somewhat away from Russia, a greater understanding, he said, of the geopolitical situation and seeing China as an adversary and Russia on the side of China. So they've got, I think, some hope in Ukraine about having the Americans more on their side. And while in Europe people see the action in Venezuela, for example, as being simply a big violation of international law and playing into Putin's hands by destroying the rules-based international order, if you like, in Ukraine they see that international order as being already in ruins. They absolutely agree with Mark Carney, and so they see the United States' actions against Venezuela as a sign that Trump is actually willing to take action against Russia, and they're pinning their hopes to that kind of thing.